Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Orange Team Podcast. We have a great show in store for you today. We will be discussing nostalgia, and specifically nostalgia for things that we were never a part of. We'll also be talking about consoles versus PCs and how they've shifted in the market today. And finally, a little teaser for what Theine Dreams is up to. Let's get into it.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Orange Team Podcast. I'm Mitch, he's Leighton, and like he said, we got a great show for you today.
I'm super excited. These are some pretty fun topics, things that I've had rattling around my brain, and I know you had because you're the one that came up with them. So I'm excited. I think this is really something that I think people are going to really enjoy. So let's get right into it.
Let's get into it. So nostalgia, specifically nostalgia for a time we've never experienced. I mean, you and I are both millennials, but like early 90s, like very early 90s millennials. But technically the millennial generation extends into the 80s. And the 80s have such a potent place in popular culture, whether that's music, movies, TV shows, the things we grew up watching and enjoying. And it seems to me, and I may be mistaken, maybe you have some insight here, it seems like the 80s not only never died, but are making a comeback. I've been enjoying a lot of retrowave music lately, one band of which is The Midnight. I can turn on just about any Midnight album, let it play through from start to finish, and have a very good time. And it's just got me wondering, how can music evoke such potent nostalgia for a time that I never lived? Leighton, what is your insight into that? What do you think?
It's something, I don't know. I've given it a lot of thought, yet still don't have a firm understanding of why. But my theory is, my first thought is that a lot of it stems from the fact that it's music that I grew up with through my parents. So they listened to a lot of this stuff. It was stuff that they grew up with, and being a child, I was very much tied to oh, my parents like it, this must be good. And not every child grows up that way. Some kids are like, no, I don't want to listen to my parents' stuff. I want my own stuff. But I grew up very much attached to the music that my parents listened to. Also grew up in a time where I had no choice but to listen to what my parents listened to. But, I do think that there is an element of, not to say, people say, oh, music's not as good as it used to be, and blah, blah, blah. And I think there's an element of truth to that. But I also think that that's not true. I think there's a lot of great music. I think mainstream music has gotten worse, but I don't think that music in general has gotten worse. I just think that the way we find good music or music to our tastes has changed, because we don't listen to the radio. It's on whatever Spotify or some other, Apple Music or some other service feeds it to us. So, but why it invokes that sense of nostalgia? Yeah, that's it. I think it's very different depending upon who you talk to. What makes it nostalgic for you?
Well, for me in particular, there is something, I tend to respond best to imagery, right? And there is something about the kind of the early rough around the edges synths of most 80s songs that just puts you in a particular time and place, like rain-soaked streets reflecting neon lights, or standing in an alleyway with one of those orange sodium vapor lamps kind of barely lighting the place up, and puddles splashing from the raindrops, things like that. And you can see a lot of that imagery sustained through all the visual media that came out of the 80s. Movies like, say, The Terminator, or Top Gun, or, take your pick, really. The Goonies, things of that nature. It just has a flavor that the entire decade seemed to really embody. And so even nowadays, there's a very clear line, as bands like The Midnight, which I will point out are a modern band. So not all modern music is, again, but we're enjoying the modern songs that harken back to an older age. But these bands are able to kind of tap into that particular sound and that particular place with just a few, the synth kick drum or the saxophone. Saxophones are super prominent in 80s style music. And it really comes down to just instrument choice and lyrically as well. A lot of the Midnight's songs deal with describing walking the city streets alone at night, and shadows chasing them around, or rising up out of the river beside the skyline or whatnot. And it just, fits the tone and the theme. But of course, this is just one example. It's interesting that nostalgia as an emotion or a state of mind is something that can be evoked even if, obviously we have that connection through our parents. And I'm certain that a lot of the nostalgia comes from we heard these songs or saw these movies when we were wee tiny children. But are there other things that have made us nostalgic for something we'd never experienced? Are there other examples of this, maybe in games or books or what have you?
Well, I think that there is a lot of people that have noticed that we tend to romanticize times before our time. There's always that sense of like, wow, like we see only the good and all the best bits survive, right? Those times. We don't tend to dwell on all the bad things that were happening during the 80s. I mean, some people tend to want to bring it up, but most of the time we're bringing up all the good music and the cool movies and all those things. It's like those are things that survive. So we tend to like romanticize this time, like, wow, must have been so cool to have this and be there for that. And I'm speaking from my own behalf, is just that feeling of like, man, it seemed like things were just a little bit more, I don't know. And I say this from the romantic, side of things. It just seemed like things were more free and everyone's just doing whatever. And I don't know. And nowadays we're just so inundated with so much like news and things going on, and we're just so like caught up in like the world, whereas I think back then you were so much more isolated from everything going on, so you just kind of just experience life for what it is versus focusing on all the negative. But again, I'm speaking for someone that didn't live through it. I talk to different people that lived through those times, and they're like, oh no, that's not at all what it was like. This was going on, and we were afraid for this, and we thought this was going to happen, and then you also start to realize that like they went through the same things we're going through now, just without the internet, but like a lot of the same worries and fears that we just. So I'm sorry, I'm kind of tanging it a little bit, but as far as like the nostalgic side, I think it comes from a sense of like we see all the good from that time. And I think every generation to a certain extent has always looked back on the generation before and thought, well, except for probably people during World War II and stuff. I don't know. I think there's a very complicated, deep-rooted thing in there. Like maybe it's like that grass is greener on the other side kind of feeling.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned people feeling free. I think that's something a lot of people associate the 80s with, odd as it sounds, because there's this particular meme picture that I've seen making the rounds a lot, and it shows this guy with like a nice suit jacket, but it's like unbuttoned and just kind of hanging loose, and he's pumping gas, and he's like illuminated by those bright overhead fluorescent lights at a gas station. In the background you see the gas station sign, and it says like $1.20 a gallon or whatever, and he's got a cigarette hanging from his mouth, and it's obviously twilight. You can see the sky in the background, and it just feels 80s, right? That whole guy driving a Ferrari coming back from his Wall Street job or whatever. I think that image, because people have always gravitated towards images like that, like James Dean, that sort of devil may care, rebel without a cause, just putting the roof down in your convertible and driving all night, blasting music with a cigarette, like that. Just kind of evokes that same rebellious nature, and that really embodied the 80s. At least as far as I say it embodies the 80s, but I never experienced them. It's just the lens culturally through which I'm perceiving the 80s. Talking about crises and things, the first thing that came to mind was I know the 1980s suffered an oil crisis, where, that would have dramatically affected the price of gasoline and maybe even other utilities and things of that nature. Like they experienced their own crises. They experienced their own global catastrophes, just like we did. But I think you hit on the heart of it when you said the one thing they didn't have was the internet. Obviously they could still stay connected through the evening news, through the newspaper, but there is something about the internet that makes everything globally so immediate. And maybe to some degree, the nostalgia we have for times past is just being a little more disconnected from every major catastrophe across the globe.
Yeah, I do think that there was a time where you didn't need to know every bad thing that was happening in the world, because as much as you want to help people and you want to make a difference and you want to do things, but it's like at the end of the day, I can't help every person in every part of the world, and knowing about it only makes my life, it doesn't make me a better person knowing every bad thing that's happened. I mean, to a certain extent, you could say, well, it makes you appreciate what you have, and that's true, but I think that there is an element of overdoing this, an information overload. So, yeah, I think it is hard because we're absolutely force-fed every single drama that's going on, whether it be a celebrity drama or a world drama, political or otherwise. And we're also fed a lot of headlines that make us afraid of everything, when in reality they're just trying to get clicks. And back then it was the same thing. They were just trying to get views on their channels, or they were on TV, or they were trying to sell newspapers. Or it's not a new phenomenon. It's just gotten bigger. Yeah. And I think, but at the same time, we also live in a day and age where, at the end, we can turn some of those things off. We don't have to see all that stuff. We just kind of feel like we need to. But
just turn off your computer, bro.
Yeah, go touch grass.
Go touch grass.
Yeah,
that's like the unofficial motto for the Orange Team podcast. Is go touch grass, bro.
It's kind of, yeah. I mean, because we're gamers here. We love playing games, game development, media, all those things. But at the end of the day, what makes is having a balance in life. You got to have a balance. Like, we go outside and breathe the fresh air and touch grass. And anyway, but back to the topic. I think one thing that came to mind too about the 80s is that when we talk about the 80s, it's kind of like this. So, like, it's almost like someone's already prepackaged the 80s for us. Like, we have grown up with this. Like, when they show you stuff from the 80s or they talk about the 80s, there's always certain imagery and certain songs and certain things they always use to exemplify the 80s. And I think that, so for us growing up in the 90s and the 2000s, there's almost like we idolize it because it's been packaged for us in this, wow, look at the 80s, right? It's like, it's yeah. So I think, like we said, we kind of talk about the 80s as if we were there, but we weren't. And it's purely based on the package that was delivered to us by the media and a bit by our parents. I think most of my understanding of the 80s comes from my dad, who loved the 80s. And, that was when he was young and traveling around and doing a lot of the, but I think that some of that also comes from the fact that that's when he did most of the exciting things in his life. So to him, there's an associative thing with the 80s as well. And I think of in the show Bluey, there's this episode where the dad's talking about his life, and it's like, oh, we're riding around, we didn't have helmets because it was the 80s, man.
Yeah.
and I think about that, it's like, wow, not that we shouldn't be like, yeah, no helmets, because, like, well, yeah, but then, brain damage. But, it was a sense of, like, rebelliousness and freedom. And I think there's, in our minds, I think maybe the 80s kind of, if there was a word to describe the 80s, it might be rebellious. Not that
definitely.
they weren't rebellious before that, but it just kind of gives that rebel vibe. And I think maybe there's something in us that we just, even if we aren't rebellious, technically, like, we don't act on it, there's a certain thing inside of you that wants to be a little bit rebellious, a little bit. And that's what the 80s kind of exemplifies, is that side of us.
Yeah, and I think you said two different things I agreed with. One is that it's how the 80s is packaged. I mean, as far as from our perspective, I mean, let's be honest, most of what we learned from the 80s, we learned from, like, The Breakfast Club or, like, Stranger Things, right? So it's all about how it's been presented, and it will always be presented in an idealized, kind of a rose-colored glasses perspective. But that personal freedom, I mean, personal freedom is one part of it, the rebelliousness is one part of it, but you mentioned something earlier on. We're just kind of oversaturated in our modern culture. We are oversaturated with information, we're oversaturated with news, and it just gets to be kind of overwhelming. And again, that may be the last era really before the advent and spread of the internet, which kept us plugged in 24/7. The 80s was the era of, there was one phone in each house, and it was a corded phone that you had to, Sandra's boyfriend called, so she wants to walk all the way into the bathroom with the phone, just to have a private conversation. Like, there was the simplicity of that. That was the last era of cul-de-sac, playing out in the cul-de-sac until dusk and all that.
So I'm gonna piggyback on this just with something that I heard about recently while listening to another podcast.
Okay.
I'll quote it. It ties into this. It's guys called Colin Samir, and they were interviewing Matt Pat and his wife Steph. And one of the things that she brought up was that let me ask you something. If you think of the word happiness, what do you think is the inverse of happiness?
Wow. Well, I want to say sadness, but I can also see maybe despair, maybe having a lack of agency. I mean, let's stick with sadness.
So, I mean, I think in the traditional sense, you're right. Opposite of happiness is sadness, right? In the study that she was quoting, so Matt's wife Steph is saying that actually the inverse of happiness is interestingness, which doesn't make sense when you first say it. But basically, they did a study of a bunch of people that they're very accomplished people that have done a lot of interesting things in their life, but they're very busy and their life is very complicated. And they said if they were to describe their life, they say it's interesting, but they're not happy. Yeah. And then people that were happy but had very simple lives. Where I'm getting at with this is not to say that, oh, you shouldn't pursue things or have an interesting life, but essentially what it really is not the opposite is interestingness. I would say the better way to look at it is simplicity versus complexity. And the reason I bring this whole thing up is because of what we just mentioned, is the simpler time, right? Life is so complicated now, and I think that's part of the reason people are so unhappy is that we have access to a lot of amenities that make our life easier, but we also have way more going on. There's way more expected of us because we have all these things that are supposedly make our life easier and more efficient. It's not that we got these things and suddenly we had less work to do. If anything, we're expected to do more and their output should be more because these tools make it easier to do more. Versus
definitely.
So I think that's part of the reason we look back on these times is they were a simpler time. One phone, no internet. You'd go out and ride bikes with your friends, and after school, you'd maybe watch a TV show if it was on TV. You didn't have the choice of 1,000 movies to watch on Netflix because you had everything at your fingertips. You had to just enjoy what was there, and you just kind of enjoyed life for what it was because it was just, if it's happening, it's happening. If it's not, it's not. If you wanted to watch that TV show, it's on at this time. If you don't see it that time, you missed it. And also, if it was a popular show, everyone was watching it. So you had something that built everyone together, whereas now everyone has such an individualized life that we don't have any connection anymore. So I think that's part of the reason we idealize that time is it seemed like everyone was just more connected, even though we were quote-unquote disconnected. So I think that's part of it. So anyway, that was a long way of basically bringing up what I thought was a very interesting concept of simplicity versus complexity and how it works with happiness.
That is a very potent observation. Like, that's almost an entire podcast unto itself, just unpacking that and the implications for that for the modern, connected tech gamer interested person, right? Because our lives are we're introducing complexity all the time. Right now, I'm sitting at one computer. I've got another computer over there. That's kind of my workstation. I've got another computer kind of behind this one. That's my home lab. And just thinking about, each computer, I don't know, does the tech we add into our lives simplify things or does it add complexity? And if it adds complexity, which it most likely does, is it a worthwhile trade-off? Are you getting your money's worth out of the added complexity in your life? That's an interesting question.
I think that what we end up doing, and I'll say for me, I'm not going to say what everyone does. What I tend to do with technology is I always want to get the most out of it. So what ends up happening, and because tech, and we've talked about this before, is this sense that tech does everything now, right? And so I'm the kind of person that I get a device and I want to utilize it to its max, which means I'm on the device more. And that's how it's designed. Our iPhones and everything, for example, we carry a computer in our pockets everywhere and it can take your pictures, it can show you videos, it can play you music, it can make phone calls, it can send messages, it can keep, way too many things, which, is supposed to be a selling point, but what it's actually done is the inverse. It's actually, and they've had to create features to help offset how good it is at doing its job. the focus modes and the time limiting and stuff. It's like, it's weird that we have to create a feature to offset the added features of the device, because the device needs to be everything. But by being everything, it's actually now a problem. And it's weird. I think back in the day, goes back to what we said before, there was a separation of devices. A phone was a phone, a TV was a TV, and it was so much easier to just, do the one thing with it. But now we're like, no.
They've created the problem, and then they've created the solution. And meanwhile, you're still shopping at their Quickie Mart both ways.
Oh yeah, they charge you in and out.
Yeah.
This is like creating your like a roller coaster tycoon. It's like creating a fee to get in and creating an exit fee to get out.
Yeah, and then charging for the bathrooms while you're in there.
Yeah, charge for the bathrooms and yeah, it's literally just gouging people. So yeah, it's weird. Well, there's so much to unpack there. It's a deep dive. We may dive more into this at a later time. Please let us know in the comments if this is something you'd like to hear us talk more about, and maybe do a little more research. Please leave feedback too. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Because
I'm writing it down right now.
Yeah, it's a subject that I love these kind of subjects. I think it's fascinating, the psychological aspects of our world and the technology and how it plays into that, because I have been on both sides of the fence. I grew up in a farming world where everything was a lot more. I say it's not technological, but actually farming is one of the most high-tech worlds you can be in right now. But also just the simplicity of farming life to the fast-paced world of tech. And I see both sides. I don't think tech is one of those things that is innately bad. I think that's something that we can use properly, but I think that it is also something that has brought about, expedited, or been a catalyst for revealing a lot of the problems in humanity and expediting the result. So I think that there's a balance in trying to understand that. So I think that's something we can dive into a little bit more at another time, because I think it deserves its own podcast. But I think, it's just the concept of nostalgia and how that affects us in terms of movies, music, games, and how our perception is very potent. So
yeah. Well, I'm creating a lot of work for you, by the way, when you're editing, with how much I've been touching my mic stand so far this episode. So good luck in editing all those binks and bonks out.
Yeah.
I actually kicked it at one point. That was fun.
Yep.
But on the topic of getting charged every which way, that makes me think of consoles. I mean, consoles are where fundamentally DLC and microtransactions began, with horse armor on Oblivion. You remember that?
I do remember that, and I remember it being such a meme back in the day, and yet, and it still is. The fact that you can say horse armor and most people know what you're talking about. It was the original DLC.
Well, that's where it started, and not to mention also gating multiplayer behind a subscription, whereas PCs have always just allowed, for the most part, free matchmaking. It was almost expected that developers would throw up a matchmaking server and put players together in servers. I think Valve did a really good job with sort of, I don't want to call it peer-to-peer, but it's like everybody who has the game can essentially spin up their own server, provided the ports are forwarded, everyone else can join, and they can play and have a good time.
Yeah, because it's two different, it's multiple ways they can do it. I mean, you can offer peer-to-peer, and that makes it available forever. Dedicated servers offered by the developers, or you can make it offered so that you can have your own. And I think
column A, little column B.
Yeah, well, I think that the peer-to-peer and the home server thing should be always available for games, even after the developer's done with it. But that's a whole...
It should be, but is it?
But it's interesting you bring up the fact that, consoles brought in DLC, and they charge a lot for multiplayer. But what I've seen now is that while, yes, PCs offer, usually free-to-play multiplayer, and better backwards compatibility, things like that, the market is getting crazy for people want to build a PC. The cost to build you can build a decent one for not too much, but if you want to build even a mid-range one, maybe to kind of give it some longevity, you're talking $1,500 entry fee just for the PC, not including if you don't have a monitor, a mouse, keyboard, headphones and or speakers, all those things, good, maybe a good router or something. I don't know. You're talking up to $2,000 just to get into PC gaming. is the cost now getting out of hand? Compared to a
I
console,
really,
you could buy a Xbox or a PlayStation for $400 to $500.
yeah, I really feel like the cost is getting out of hand. And you'll notice that if you price out a PC, like 1/3 to half of the price is going to be your graphics card, depending on what kind of gaming you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like I just experienced this helping a friend put a computer together. They sort of just threw me a budget and said, "Hey, figure out what fits within this budget." And so I started piecing it out, and as soon as I threw the graphics card in there, everything changed, and it was like, oh. And so we had to have a conversation about, very specifically, what games are you planning to play? What are you willing to compromise on? Which was, at first it was, hey, just build me the best computer money can buy. And then it quickly became, okay, well, let's meet in the middle here. Let's find, because that's going to be more than you know. And, it ended up being, I was able to contribute a graphics card and even an old processor to their build, and that helped bring their cost way down. But if they had to buy it, even just a mid-range computer off the shelf, that was going to be about $1,500, which was kind of shocking to me, honestly. Something to consider. Yes, consoles are so much cheaper. People laugh at the Xbox Series X or what have you. Think about this. All the consoles are sold at a loss. So what you get in terms of the hardware is being subsidized by your Xbox Game Pass subscription or your PlayStation Plus subscription or the games themselves. That's the only way they're able to keep the prices where they're at and keep them competitive. PC gaming, obviously, who's PC gaming is kind of competing with consoles, but PC gaming obviously has the upper hand in terms of you get to build exactly what you want. You can do so much more with your device. It's not just a gaming device. It's not just a portal into Xbox Game Pass or whatever other service. And of course, PC gaming versus console gaming, we're seeing that coming back into view. People are talking about it again with this new generation, but that's nothing new. That's been a headline topic all the way back to, I feel like probably around the 360 PS3 era. It was PS2 and before, I feel like it wasn't as big of a conversation. I feel like it was 360 when we started to see consoles that really could rival the PCs of the time for graphics and for gameplay experiences, that people started talking about it. PC Master Race, being one of the memes around, PCs are always better than those console plebeians, What are the pros and cons, though, to both today, in your opinion?
Well, I think that PCs, at the end of the day, were always going to be better than consoles. As far as, like, the raw power, what you can do with them, like, there's no questioning that if you build a really good PC, it's just going to be better than consoles, especially because most consoles have a certain shelf life where they're going to stay the same specs, and, it could be 5 to 6 years. Whereas PCs, they get new updates every year. There's new graphics card, there's new processors. So yeah, if you buy, build a PC midway through the life cycle, like right now, if you bought a 4090 and put it in a PC, it's going to absolutely trump an Xbox Series X. However, the trade-off is that, I'm going to use myself as an example, and I'm going to not look at Xbox or PlayStation. I bought a Nintendo Switch at launch. And obviously the Nintendo Switch is nowhere near the raw power of either of those consoles, the PC, anything, right?
It doesn't really need to be, though. It's kind of overdoing its own thing.
But see, that's the thing, right? It just kind of comes down to the person and what you want out of a game. I've had that same Switch for almost 7 years. It's coming on 7 years now that the Switch came out. And
that's unbelievable.
It's the same. I paid $300 for it back 7 years ago, and I haven't had to buy anything new since. It plays the same. I can play all the games I want on it. They play on my TV just fine. I can play in a handheld. And yes, they don't blow me away with graphics, though I will say some of the games have come out, like Pikmin 4 and Tears of the Kingdom, while not, still not going to blow it out of the water, are very, very optimized for the Switch. It's like, okay, what a value. For $300, I got a system I got 7 years of value out of, and the games all run fine. I mean, some people are, again, first-party games tend to all run fine. Don't talk about Pokemon. It's made by another company. it's, yes, it doesn't have the fidelity and maybe not the resolution, but they tend to always hit their target frame rate, at least if it's made by Nintendo. Yes, if you want third-party games, don't go to a Switch for third-party games. You go for indie games and Nintendo games, okay? If you want the third-party games, get a PlayStation, get an Xbox, okay? Yeah. But even then, let's get away from Nintendo stuff, right? If you bought a PS5 at launch, right, that thing still plays 4K games. It plays all the third-party games, plus some great, first-party games, and same with Xbox. And you can hold on to that thing for 5-6 years, and they're still making games that work for that system. And like in the Xbox case, it's backwards compatible with just about every Xbox game. So, right. And it's only $400 to $500, and you have a system that just works. You don't have to worry about drivers. You don't have to worry about, some other program running in the background that's going to mess up your game. It's made for playing games, and you can plug in multiple controllers, and in the Xbox case, you can still do a mouse and keyboard for some of it. Like it's just the versatility is crazy. And then with things like Game Pass, man, the value is you're not playing that much for games now. If you want to just have access to games, I'm just going to be honest. Like as someone who loved I built my own PC. I have a huge library in Steam, but I found myself going to the Switch and to other, to consoles so much more now because of the convenience and the simplicity of not worrying about if a game will run and things like that. So, it's
hard. You're saying,
yeah,
one of the major value propositions then of the console is that it trades complexity for simplicity. You have a gaming dedicated device that just does one job and one job well.
What a callback.
Hey, same episode.
No, you're 100% right. You're 100% right. I'm glad you brought that up because that's 100% true. I can go to my TV. I literally pick up the controller. I have controllers hang on the wall. I press the home button. It automatically turns on my Switch, which automatically turns on my TV. I'm usually starting into a game within like 30 seconds at the most. Sometimes almost immediately if it's a game I already had open. And it's so nice. It's just, and I'm playing it on a big TV. I can play it with my kids and family. And if it's like a big epic game too, it's fun to play on the TV. It's just so much nicer than playing on a monitor or small screen. And I have my sound system. It's just, for me, I found, and I'm going to keep saying for me, because obviously everyone has different tastes. I'm not here to tell people that buying a PC is a bad idea. I'm not here to tell people that PC gaming is worse. I'm just saying that I've found that the convenience of consoles has gotten so good. The pricing of consoles is so much more appealing. Barrier to entry is way better. That's the big problem with PCs now is the barrier to entry is so high. If you don't have a massive library already in Steam of games for your PC, you don't really see the value of going down that road. Like backwards compatibility doesn't mean much to you because if you're a young kid, 10 or 12 and wants a gaming PC, you don't really care about playing games from the early 2000s. Those don't have the nostalgia level for you. You care about the latest games. And buying an Xbox or a PlayStation is going to play you the best games, all with pretty good fidelity. I'm not going to lie. They get the fidelity on the consoles has gotten pretty good. And they're usually steady frame rates. And it's just as simple as put in the disc or download the game and it just works. It just plays.
Right. Definitely. And I will point out to you that this will be fun because you're kind of our console advocate. And I've really been deep in PC gaming, not only my whole life, but still to this day. Like we have an Xbox Series S, or is that just an Xbox One S? I mean, who's to say? Microsoft threw out so many different Xboxes over the past couple of years. But for me, when it came to kind of gaming with the family, like I tend to upgrade my computers every couple of years. And so what ended up happening was I handed down my last main personal computer to be the family computer. And it had enough going on inside in terms of its processor and graphics card that it could play most games. And here's something else to talk about when it comes to PCs versus consoles. There was another major value proposition consoles used to have, and that was the console exclusive. When Halo released, it was Xbox only. When God of War and The Last of Us released, those games were PlayStation only. But now you can find all of those same games not only on a PC-specific store, like say the Microsoft Store, or I don't know where PlayStation would serve it up, but you can find them on Steam. Now, when I played through Halo with my son, I handed him down a computer which can run the Master Chief Collection. We played on PC. We didn't play on Xbox. That would have been impossible prior to Microsoft deciding, hey, as long as they're still in our ecosystem, we don't care. Go ahead, buy the game on Steam or whatnot. The console exclusive seems to be dying out. Do any true exclusives even exist anymore? What do you think?
I will say you're right when it comes to PlayStation and Xbox. And actually, there's some news coming out that Microsoft's got a big announcement coming up. Obviously, this is dating the podcast at the time of recording. But hope by the time you guys hear this podcast, you'll know what the big announcement was. But there are rumors that they are going to start being more of a software-based company and not really focusing on pushing Xboxes. They'll still sell them, but they're means to sell their software. And I think Sony's looking at a similar model. They make more money selling the games than they do the consoles. They make a loss in the console, so why not push it to other systems where they may make money? Steam Deck becoming a big thing now. Being able to play God of War on a Steam Deck, it's like, okay, and Sony's tried to succeed in the handheld market and not done so well, whereas the deck is out there and they can okay, we can make it for that. And I know Microsoft even talked about making their games available for Nintendo. They're probably more of a cloud streaming service. Nintendo is the only company that still is holding true to their exclusives. And we'll see how long that lasts. I think they're going to hold on as long as they can. They're a very old school company. But yeah, I think you're right. The exclusive is what held people to the systems. I do think that there's brand loyalty to things like PlayStation. And I do think that there is still a value in the sense of some people just really don't want to get into PC building. People, I think about a lot of people, they buy these systems to play basketball and football or racing games. Yeah. Right? They just literally buy it for that one game. They're just going to buy a console and play with a controller, even Call of Duty. And yeah, there's still some value there.
And more than that, they're going to buy their console to play FIFA, Madden, and the latest Call of Duty, but they're going to get their news and emails on their iPad, or they're going to stay connected to people via Facebook and Messenger on their iPhone. Mm-hmm. The PC, it used to be that in order to be connected, it was presumed you had a PC. Nowadays, there are so many alternatives that you might be just as connected. Frankly, people might not ever know that you simply do not own a PC, that you're engaging with Facebook and Instagram off your phone, that you're gaming on your Xbox. And even with cross-platform play, sometimes an icon pops up, but if you weren't paying attention, your buddy would just jump into your lobby and you'd play together. And there's an argument to be made that people who are playing on controller kind of become easy to pick out of a crowd with the way they're turning and playing, depending on the game. But there's a chance you might not notice. And that's the world we live in, where there's this digital realm, and there are all of these different on-ramps and all of these different vehicles we can get into to then tour and explore this digital space that exists almost parallel to our what we would call meat space, our physical world, right? The computer is not the only show in town anymore.
Yeah. No, it's true. And it's kind of, again, calling back to the everything does everything thing. Consoles also can do a lot of PC things. The Xbox and the PlayStation are literally just PCs. They're x86 architecture.
Are they really?
Yes. They're just running AMD processors and graphics, both the PlayStation and Xbox.
Xbox Series X.
And Nintendo's running an NVIDIA chip. So but it's an ARM-based NVIDIA chip. For those who don't know what ARM is the same chips you see in your phones and now the new MacBooks.
So when we say x86 and ARM, fun little sidebar, that refers to the instruction set that the processors are using to move data around different memory registers or whatnot. Because at root, all your computers are doing is crunching numbers, ones and zeros, moving data through caches and whatnot. So x86 is typically computers, and ARM was typically mobile, meaning phones and tablets, but we're beginning to see it pop up in other places.
Mm-hmm. ARM tends to be I think it's just due to the type of instruction set it has, a little bit more energy efficient. They can make them smaller. x86 is a little more power hungry, but the reason we primarily use x86 is just because of the legacy software. primarily because we have so many things that need to run on that. But Apple's somewhat figured that out for the Apple side of things by making a program called Rosetta, well, it's Rosetta 2, that can translate those instructions into an ARM-based system. I think Microsoft's working on a similar thing. So we may work into a future where it's all ARM. That's a whole subject for another time.
That's a subject. I do want to throw in there, though. You talk about translating. It's basically like translating between two languages, like English and Spanish, on the fly as you're using the program, right? I didn't expect it to work that well. But the first thing I did when I got my M1 Mac is I went and installed World of Tanks, which was a game I was playing at the time. Fired it up, and I just said, let's just stress test this. Let's see how this does. I got like 60 FPS with all the settings on high. And that was the moment I knew that Apple could do it. They could transition to ARM with, and make the transition for everyone stuck on x86 seamless for however long. And I think we are going to see the industry shift into ARM.
If I'm being flat out honest, this is a little bit of conspiracy. I think that the thing that held Apple back from making transition and not doing it earlier was more to do with getting Rosetta working and less to do with them actually making the processors. I think they were probably ready to make the chips a while ago, but they really wanted to make sure that transition was going to be good, because what they did was just voodoo magic. I mean, like you just said, the ability to run a system, it's not emulation,
real time.
It's not virtualization. Yeah. It's something. It's different, but to do it in real time, people don't understand just how insane it is that works. It's right. So it's very impressive what Apple did. It's why they've been so successful with their new machines. So to kind of get us back to what we were talking about though with PCs and consoles, and I think people are wondering, like, obviously I tend to lean on the console side, you lean on the PC side, and I'm gonna say it again. There's no right or wrong in this. It's purely based on what do you have the budget for and what are you interested in. But I thought it was an interesting topic because just and it came up because I was watching Linus Tech Tips, and they were talking about just how expensive like graphics cards alone have gotten, which has made people a lot less interested in new releases in PC components because it just feels so unattainable for so many people. They've watched viewership go down on their reviews for graphics cards because people are just not excited about them anymore because A, the old ones still work pretty good, but B, no one can afford them other than just people who just have a lot of money sitting in their pocket for no reason. And I'm just not one of those people anymore. I have a house and kids. So I tend to focus on where I get the best bang for my buck. And I used to think that having a PC was the best bang for your buck because you could get Steam deals, right? Steam sales. You save so much money on games. But now with the cost of a PC being what it is, and kind of be needing to upgrade a PC it depends what games you play, but I feel like every 3 to 4 years minimum, it's very expensive to do those upgrades. Whereas a console, you can get more years out of it, and the upgrades are cheaper. And they're getting better at being backwards compatible with these systems. PlayStation 5 backwards compatible with PS4. Xbox pretty much backwards compatible to the beginning because they've basically been using x86 similar type systems since the beginning. They've basically been PCs in a box since the original Xbox. Right. Not that they are perfect one-to-one. They still have to do some work to make it work, but Microsoft's been one of the best cases of supporting backwards compatibility. Nintendo was at certain points in time, and then every time they changed to a certain system, they did get rid of it. I think the Wii was probably one of the best backwards compatible systems out there.
Yeah, what was with the GameCube disc? Like, do you remember, like, on the topic of compatibility, what in the world was going on with the GameCube disc?
I know the story. That's a whole... do you want me to get into that? I can get into that.
Can you give me the elevator pitch?
I'll give you the elevator pitch. So, basically the N64 didn't do as well as Nintendo wanted. PlayStation came in, absolutely wrecked them with the CDs. So Nintendo realized they couldn't stick to cartridges anymore. They stuck with cartridges because they're very anti-piracy. So they switched to discs, but they did the mini discs because they thought, that will help prevent piracy because they're way harder to burn, onto, and they're less accessible than a regular DVD. It didn't stop people from pirating. They just had to get more creative. But it was Nintendo's way of doing it. And by doing that, they handicapped themselves to 1.5 gigabytes per game space, while the PlayStation Xbox had 8.5 gigabytes dual-layer DVDs. So they had way more space, which is why third parties tend to still go to those systems because they weren't handicapped by the space limitations of the GameCube. Same thing with the PlayStation. They were handicapped by the space limitations of the N64 cartridges versus like the 700 megabytes they could have on a CD, and they could put multiple CDs. I think Final Fantasy VII had like 2 or 3 CD, maybe more, because they had memory cards to save your save file, so you could just switch discs. So they could do full rendered movies. They could do full voice acting. They could have full like orchestrated music. So like PlayStation absolutely killed it and they were also able to play MP3 CDs, which at the time was a big deal. PlayStation 2 could play DVDs, which is a big deal. So yeah, that's why they had the little discs. That's why the Wii eventually did go to DVDs, because they realized it isn't helping us. And,
we're handicapping ourselves for no benefit.
Right. And then Wii U went to like a Blu-ray-esque kind of disc without being Blu-ray, because they didn't want to pay Sony for the licensing fee. Fun fact, Sony owns Blu-ray. And so...
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's also... They own DVD, if you didn't know that too. That's also why they were able to sell their players for so much cheaper than everybody else, because they didn't have to pay licensing fees to have that feature. Nintendo would have had to pay licensing fees to use... At least for DVD playback. So I don't think Nintendo had to pay for the Wii to have DVD... the licensing fee for that. They could use DVD players, but they could not play back DVD movies. That required them paying a license to Sony. And so that's why the Wii could not play movies, even though it had a DVD player. I can give you a lot of trivia. I know a lot about why Nintendo did everything, even if it was for the good, bad, or otherwise. So
I think we need to just give you a segment in each episode called like Layton's Trivia Time, and just throw a random like, hey Layton, how come the N64 cartridge works the way it did? Yeah, that'd be great.
I could tell you about like the architecture of the N64 and why it's not technically a 64-bit system, even though it's called the N64.
We'll have to save that for next time, because
Yeah,
I think that'll get pretty deep.
I'll leave that as a teaser. But yes, I am a wealth of... I am very much a Nintendo person, good, bad, or otherwise what Nintendo does. So, but yeah,
it's let you off the chain more.
Yeah, well, we'll find a time. We'll find a time. Don't you worry. This is a podcast just started, man. We got time. We got room. So
we've got seasons, plural.
So I'm big into Nintendo stuff, but one thing that we need to talk about before we wrap this podcast up is something that you're really big into, and that is developing games. And
I was gonna say,
yeah, I think it's something we need to talk about, because for those who don't know, I'll do a little bit of an intro and let Mitch take it away. Mitch has started a long time ago. Was it 2017?
I would say that it was really 2018. Well, that gets complicated, but go ahead.
Okay, Mitch started a business with a dream to make games called Theine Dreams, and he has got a lot of history now in developing games, and he's a lot of passion and history in this, and I'll let him talk more about it. But this podcast is very much built around, like, we're going to talk about a lot of different topics, but we do want to bring up Theine Dreams and the things we're working on. And I really want Mitch to explain to you guys what Theine Dreams is, and the mission statement, the goals, and the passion, and then maybe a little teaser of what's coming.
For sure. So Theine Dreams, fun fact, the name comes from the word for caffeine in tea. That's theine. It's kind of an archaic use word, because obviously we just call it caffeine today. But back when I first started Theine Dreams, I was really stuck in a job I was unhappy with. And I was like, I will do whatever it takes to be self-employed, to kind of get out of this hole I'm finding myself in. And at one point, my idea was to start a used bookstore, which would have an associated cafe where instead of serving coffee-type drinks, we'd serve tea-type drinks. And so Theine Dreams was going to be the name of that shop. Come in, buy your used books, you'd get some sort of a tea blend and latte and be on your way. But while the vision has changed, the name has remained the same, because I kind of like the way it rolls off the tongue. That being said, my real passion was game development. And so in 2018, after being laid off from that job, so rather than needing to find an exit, they found one for me, I reached a point where I said, you always tell yourself, if I didn't have this 9 to 5, I would do X or Y. And I said, well, Mitch, now's your time to put your money where your mouth is, because you don't have this 9 to 5, you're kind of in between, as they would say. why don't you download Unity and just get to work? And so it was March 5th of 2018. I downloaded Unity, sat down, and I started a project, which became my first game endeavor, called Apex Hunters. And it was it was before Apex Legends. I have to point that out. I did not steal their name, they stole mine. And it was going to be a dinosaur hunting game. Very much in the vein of Primal Prey, which is a classic. If you go look it up, it's really hard to find, but it's there. That being said, by the time I had wrapped up kind of an alpha level prototype, obviously it was in no condition to ship. I did ship it to the Steam store for a time and then took it back down, but I learned a lot along the way. And I realized that I wanted to be a developer for a living, that was what gave me just that fire in my heart and got me up in the morning. So here we are, 7 years later. I have spent 2 years as part of an indie game dev company out of Arizona, working on a game called New City. I was the first member of the team that wasn't the project lead, and I served as sort of a systems developer on that game, working on a lot of the back-end stuff like adding a console, kind of like you would find in Quake-based games, adding different... It was a city builder. New City was basically a spiritual successor we saw to SimCity 2000, and that was our intent. And so I got to add some of the heat maps. I got to add kind of our own file type for saving and loading data, things of that nature. It was all written in C, and a lot of it was written without object-oriented programming. Very fun. But I got hands-on, and I shipped a game, and I got to be part of a team and do the community management for it, and that was it. That was what I wanted to do. You know, having dreams of working for Bungie or Valve or whatever growing up, listening to the Bungie podcast when Halo 3 was launching, and just imagining myself at a desk in there working all night long and, eating pizza to subsist and then falling asleep under my desk for a few hours before starting over. I will say that the day we launched New City, when I was working for Lone Pine Games, I was I was on the clock technically for 32 hours. And that was one of the best days. Wow. And so I have, since leaving Theine Dreams, I did take a job where I'm in web development right now, but I'm still writing code for a living, and that's still what really gets me fired up. But obviously, I've got more games I want to make. And so Theine Dreams as an entity continues. And I have rallied a team comprised of Leighton and myself, and two others, Andrew and his wife Melinda, who is serving as an artist. Andrew is going to be a developer. He's still trying to figure out, like, he's wants to do some web dev, he wants to do some work on the game, and we're still kind of settling in on where he'll plug in. But then Leighton, of course, very clearly having an aptitude for being a producer and marketer and all of those things. That's going to be his role on the team. And of course, if you want to write code, dude, like, let's do it. Whatever you want to do, we'll try it. And that's the spirit of Theine Dreams. That's what I want to create, is a company, a team where the people who say, man, if I just didn't have to do my 9 to 5, I would do X or I would do Y. I want to just say, okay, come on board, let's do it. You want to try that? I will give you the space to try that. And we'll build something cool together, because that's very much in the spirit of the old game development companies, going all the way back to the early 90s, like id Software, working on, at first Commander Keen, and then making Wolf 3D. It was a small team of people who maybe hadn't really worked on games before, or had, but never did what they were trying to do. 3D cutting edge shooters and whatnot. I know that the team at Rare, who worked on GoldenEye for the Nintendo 64, that tie-in 007 game, most of their team members, as far as legend has it, had never worked on a game before. And that thrills me to no end. I would love to ship a game with people who are like, hey, this is the first game I ever got to work on. And then I would love to continue to grow that team and see what other cool things we could build together. So, all of that being said, what's on the docket for Theine Dreams? One thing we're trying to do right now is figure out what's that first game that buys us the space and maybe a little bit of a revenue stream to then work on the next more complicated game. And it so happens that of the different ideas we had off the cuff, myself and Andrew are both really enjoying Bloons TD6 right now, which is a tower defense game with monkeys throwing darts at balloons. And so I have my fantasy fiction world, which when I said that it's complicated talking about dates, like we wanted to say 2018, I started Theine Dreams. It's kind of complicated because I've been trying to make games off and on my entire life, whether that was tabletop role-playing games, whether that was for my, at the time, girlfriend, now wife's Christmas present back in like 2010, I think 2010. I coded her a little game that would procedurally generate a mansion every time she played, and you would be finding these presents, and this creature would be kind of stalking you around the mansion. But if you found all the presents, it would put together a message that said like "Happy Birthday" to her, or "Merry Christmas" to her. And so, I've just always been making something. And so, that being said, that fantasy world that I've been working on for more than a decade, I decided that would be the setting for our first game. I decided that we like tower defense, so we're going to see what we can do that's new and unique in the realm of tower defense. Its work in progress name, in dev code name, if you will, is called Defense of Elevar. Elevar being that particular world. And it's going to deal with this world that's sort of beset by what we'll call the darkness. In that world, they might call it the gloaming. And so the darkness is beginning to besiege some of the more populated cities in the world, and there's this group that call themselves the Travelers that may or may not be natives to the world in question, who are going to rise up and stand against the darkness. And so we're going to try to translate that narrative into a tower defense game. Obviously, the game design is still very early. We don't have much to show. I've been building out some tooling in Unity lately. Like I built a tool that allows me to define, if you've played Bloons TD6, you know the balloons follow a set path across the map from the entrance to the exit. You've got to have someone to define that path. And so I built a little visual tool that in the Unity editor, you can place nodes and it'll automatically place a spawn point for our creatures. And then you node your way all the way to the last point. And then we're going to, have a trigger at the end that reduces the player's health or whatnot. Melinda, being our artist, has been hard at work just coming up with concepts. And some of them are really, really cool. Like I told her at one point, hey, go look at like old Blizzard concept art from when Blizzard was working on like Warcraft 3 and World of Warcraft, and she did. And she came up with some cool stuff. One of the conceits of Defense of Elevar is that it's a world that's primarily inhabited by like anthropomorphic creatures. So if you've read the book series Redwall, or you're familiar with kind of Disney films, the whole idea like Robin Hood, right? You might see anything from shrews to mice to hares to badgers to even stoats or ferrets, what have you. This is a world that's primarily inhabited by those kind of beast folk. But, they walk around on two legs for the most part and have swords and bows and maybe even some magical abilities that they'll all be using to keep the darkness at bay. And so that's something that's in very early pre-production at the moment. We do have a target, though, of September, well, let's say the end of quarter 3. And this is just a target, and we can miss it. But by the end of quarter 3, we'd like to have an alpha where the core gameplay mechanics are in place. And even if we're using mostly placeholder art, you can basically sit down and play a round of Defense of Elevar from start to finish.
That's really, it's so, I'm stepping in obviously now. We've had the whole story. We're talking about the tower defense.
I need to catch my breath.
Yeah, go catch your breath. As someone who's, this is funny for people who don't know, Mitch and I talk a lot, and we obviously have our podcast, but there's stuff that even I get to learn through these conversations about what's going on, because, we live in different parts of the world, and, it's really cool to hear, where things are at and where things are going, and I think we're onto something pretty cool. I'm excited because I've played Bloons, and so this is going to be funny. Mitch got me into balloons, and I had it on my phone, and I ended up having to delete it off my phone because I was so stinking addicted to it. It was actually becoming a problem. So once that happened, I was instantly sold on what Mitch is doing because it's a very addictive formula, and it's very fun, especially when I don't know. Okay, there's a whole thing in my head. I was thinking like for people like my age, but
there's a couple of key values that I want to be at the heart of everything Theine Dreams does that are kind of expressed through a tower defense. One thing I really want to emphasize with some of the games we develop, not all of them, but at least some of them, is you should be able to play them with just the mouse. There's something to be said for a game talking about complexity versus simplicity. I love a game that at the end of the night I can sit back, I don't have to have a hand on the keyboard, and I can just click, 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 whether that's Hearthstone, whether that's RuneScape, or Bloons TD6. And so making a tower defense leans into my desire for occasionally shipping a simple mouse-only game. It also gives us the opportunity to fulfill another major theme of Theine Dreams, which is going to be co-op. I'm not interested in competing in the competitive gaming arena. Like Call of Duty, Counter-Strike, that's great. They all have their time and their place. I'm not interested in building competitive games. I'm interested in building games that bring people together, that create really fun and engaging co-op experiences of the sort you would want to gather everybody over for a LAN party and play sometime. And that's the experience we've had, even though we've been playing it across the country. Andrew and I playing Bloons TD6. It's just been a great time to just hang out and just talk and be dropping monkeys around and trying to not die and then dying and laughing about it, but there's something magical about that, just building games that you experience and enjoy together as opposed to immediately pitting each other against one another. I think I've talked in the past that there's like 3 different layers to games. There's like the single player experience, there's the multiplayer co-op experience, and then there's like the multiplayer competitive experience. And I've said that, I think we were talking about Call of Duty, and I said that they put multiplayer competitive first, like multiplayer co-op second to some degree, and then like single player last. My games are probably going to either be co-op or single player first, and then co-op or single player second, and then competitive last. That doesn't mean I'll never make a competitive mode, but it's going to be the afterthought that's tacked on, and that's just the way it is. That's not the kind of game I want to make.
Maybe like a high score competitive versus a PvP.
That's exactly it. Yeah, it's not going to be you really shooting at each other necessarily. Like even Apex Hunters, I was considering because it would be cool to have a competitive game mode where it's like Slayer from Halo or whatnot, like a team deathmatch, but the dinosaurs are still spawning in and you're dodging them, shooting at each other. Like that's kind of cool, but it wouldn't be the first mode I built or even the second.
Make it so you can play as the dinosaurs?
That's another option, yes. And then the third thing I really wanted to capture, and this is more of a for right now thing. It is not a broad Theine Dreams initiative, but obviously if Theine Dreams is going to get off the ground, if this is going to work, and if I'm going to be able to make sure everyone on the team is appropriately compensated, we need a game that actually ship some copies and can ship them fairly quickly. And so a tower defense, once you've built out the core gameplay, to add maps is not trivial, but I will say that tower defense was very specifically chosen for the overall complexity of the game. It's going to be essentially 2D or 2.5D. It's not going to be like a full 3D world or what have you. So the art will be a little bit simpler to implement. The gameplay, once we get the core loop down, will be easy to iterate and evolve. And it's something we could reasonably ship in, maybe to early access by the end of the year if we really, really crank on it. But again, we're all doing this in our free time. We all have lives and families outside of this, so it's, if nothing else, an excellent opportunity for us to hang out every week and talk and just have fun creating things together. And if that's all Theine Dreams ever is, then it did its job, to be honest. But if we can build something that not only we enjoy, but other people enjoy, then that's just awesome.
Yeah, I think it's good to start on those fundamentals. We're not here to like become rich and make loads of money. We do want to be able to support ourselves, but at the end of the day, we're doing this out of a passion, for game development, for working together, friends, and creating something really cool. And we hope everyone gets to enjoy it. But we're gonna have fun along the way. We're gonna learn a lot along the way. We hope to share a lot of what we learn along the way. And we just thank everyone for tuning in and listening to this episode of the Orange Team podcast, and for hopefully you guys are getting excited for things that Theine Dreams has got cooking, and we'll be definitely keeping you guys updated as new things progress. If there's anything you have questions about, feel free to leave a comment and let us know. We're very much would love to engage with you guys and know like what you guys think and your thoughts on those kind of things. So Mitch, this has been really fun. I really enjoyed these conversations and these topics that we had, and I think I think we learned a lot. We grew a lot from this.
I really enjoyed it, and I'm serious about a Leighton trivia corner moment.
We'll talk about that. And, definitely, again, let us know what you guys think. To everyone who's still listening, thank you so much. We appreciate it. If you did like this podcast, we do appreciate a like, a subscribe, or just even a comment, just something to let us know that you're out there, you're listening. And we just would love to engage with you guys and know more of what we can do to make this better. But till next time, I'm Leighton. He's Mitch. This is the Orange Team Podcast. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.